The late morning sunlight poured into the glass windows of La Maravilla, one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city, turning every polished surface into a quiet reflection of gold. The clinking of cutlery and the soft murmur of wealthy patrons filled the air, but everything shifted the moment Aurelio Santoro walked in. He was a billionaire known for his ruthless business decisions, his cold presence, and his belief that money could bend anyone. As he entered, heads turned, and even the waitstaff straightened nervously, whispering with concern. Aurelio moved with an air of superiority, his expensive suit catching the sunlight as though demanding attention. But none of the staff suspected that by the end of this daylight afternoon, the man would be humbled in a way he had never imagined, and the person responsible would be someone he didn't think twice about when he first saw her. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of simple humanity, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Corner. And before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We always love to see our community around the world. At the far end of the restaurant stood Marcela Rios, a young waitress in her early 20s. She moved with quiet grace, her dark hair tied back neatly, her uniform crisp despite the long morning rush. Her eyes had a calm determination, the kind born from years of carrying more weight than someone her age should. Marcela wasn't there only for a job, she was supporting her younger brother, helping her mother pay medical bills, and trying to save for a future that still felt uncertain. She had learned early that dignity wasn't defined by wealth, and pride came from how one endured struggles, not from how loudly one displayed success. She approached Aurelio's table because it was assigned to her station, not knowing that this single interaction would reopen wounds she had spent years trying to heal. Aurelio didn't bother looking at the menu. He leaned back in his chair, assessing Marcela with a gaze that felt like judgment rather than observation. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he spoke loudly in Spanish, mockingly, arrogantly, as though she were beneath him, as though he assumed she didn't understand a word. His words weren't just insulting, they were belittling, reducing her to someone he believed had no value beyond serving a plate. To him, speaking in Spanish was his way of feeling powerful, a private language he used to ridicule others without consequence. Several nearby diners turned their heads, some pretending not to hear while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marcela's hands tightened around the notepad she carried, and though she understood every word, she kept her composure. Years of hardship had taught her that reacting immediately wasn't always strength, sometimes strength was waiting for the right moment to let truth speak for itself. She had grown up speaking Spanish as her first language, but life had taken her far from the communities where it was common. She learned English quickly to help her mother navigate hospitals, workplaces, and a world that didn't wait for people like them. But in all that time, she never forgot who she was, nor the language that carried her childhood, her sorrows, and her hope. Aurelio continued speaking with sharp disrespect, making assumptions about her intelligence, upbringing, and worth. It wasn't only rude, it was personal, hitting wounds she carried silently. Marcela stepped forward, her voice steady as she responded in perfect, fluent Spanish, addressing him respectfully but firmly. She spoke in a tone so clear, so calm, and so unshaken that the entire table behind Aurelio went silent. Conversations around them softened as more diners turned to see what was unfolding. Aurelio froze mid-gesture, his eyes widening in shock. The arrogance in his expression shattered instantly, replaced with disbelief and embarrassment. He had expected ignorance, instead, he was met with articulation, confidence, and dignity far greater than his own. For the first time in a long time, perhaps the first time ever, someone had spoken to him in a way that pierced straight through the armor of money and pride he had crafted around himself. Marcela didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult him back. She simply reminded him, through her poise and fluency, that respect wasn't optional. She represented something he had forgotten, that humanity was universal, that worth wasn't determined by wealth, and that every person carried a story deeper than what could be seen at a glance. Aurelio felt his chest sink with a mix of shame and discomfort, the kind that comes when a lifetime of unchecked arrogance is suddenly reflected back with quiet truth. As Marcela walked away from the table to place his order, a whisper of admiration traveled among nearby diners. Some nodded toward her, others gave small smiles. A few even looked at Aurelio with disappointment, silently urging him to reconsider the man he had allowed himself to become. Aurelio sat there, unable to regain the air of dominance he had entered with. He watched her move through the restaurant with a grace that made his earlier behavior feel even more childish. Something inside him began to crack, not from humiliation alone, but from a realization he didn't expect. He had been raised speaking Spanish too. In fact, hearing her speak reminded him of days spent with his grandmother in a small village before wealth consumed his identity. As he ate the meal she later delivered, he found himself unable to shake the guilt pressing on him. He saw her wiping tables with tireless dedication, saw her helping an elderly couple with patience, saw her speaking gently to a nervous young server, guiding them with kindness. It pierced him that the person he had mocked was someone who carried more strength in her quiet resilience than he had in his empire of luxury. After years of abandoning humility, this encounter forced him to face a version of himself he no longer recognized. And for the first time in years, he wanted to change, not because he was caught, but because he felt something awaken inside him, the memory of who he used to be before money made him smaller instead of bigger. If this story is touching your heart so far, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Corner to support more meaningful stories. Before you hear the ending, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Marcela's place? Aurelio stood before leaving, walked to where Marcela was cleaning up, and in a soft voice, one trembling with sincerity, apologized in Spanish. Not for appearances. Not for reputation. But because he finally understood the weight of his actions. Marcela looked into his eyes, saw the genuine regret, and offered a respectful nod. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened, but it allowed something new to begin. Aurelio left that afternoon humbled, carrying a lesson that no amount of wealth could have purchased, and Marcela continued her shift